Well, hello, everybody. My name is Timothy Gager, and welcome to Virtual Fridays Dire Literary Series. Tonight, our feature is Mr. John Rosenthal, and John is a writer and a photographer, and he has written the memoir Searching for Amy Lou Danzer. And here's a little bit about John. And one thing that would be really awesome is if you go to John's website. John is a photographer, and there's so many wonderful photos from his books here, and there's, just bounce around. It actually, this will allow me to not read his bio, but we'll get into that a little bit when we do the Q&A. So if you want more information about John, go to this site, which is johnrosenthal.com. So without any further anything out of me, let's turn it on over to John.
Okay, let me just see if I can start video. Okay, I'd lost the video. I'm back on. All right. I'm assuming that nobody or very few people have read the book. So let me just give you a little bit of an introduction to what the book's about. Amy Lou Danzer, the book, by the way, is called Searching for Amy Lou Danzer. Amy Lou Danzer was my first girlfriend in Great Neck, Long Island. I suppose I was lucky. When I was 12 or 13, I would have fallen for any girl who thought I was special. She was 2 grades behind me. A silly girl, but smart and sensitive. 7 years later, she would be an admired freshman at the Rhode Island School of Design. Our romance was strictly junior high school stuff, and we broke up the way junior high schoolers break up. When we became friends again, I was living in Connecticut at a boarding school, and my parents had moved to New York City. We both liked our friendship, and she would take the Long Island Railroad into the city, and I'd meet her at Penn Station. We'd go to museums or to movies or to Broadway shows when my parents could get us tickets. That's pretty much how we conducted our friendship until she died. Over vacations, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and summer. I didn't think much about her until I was home on a vacation, and I didn't have anything to do. Call Amy, or she'd call me. When I had a driver's license, we'd drive to Jones Beach. We'd pick up where we left off. I'd give her the news of my life, the books I read, my girlfriends. I did most of the talking. I was older, had experienced more in life. She was the best listener a self-absorbed young man could ever have had. We were never lovers. We didn't even have the kind of friendship that books are written about. We only wrote a few letters to each other over the years. We rarely saw each other. When I heard that she'd committed suicide, I didn't feel at all responsible for her death, but I did recognize that I'd been part of a general failure. In September 1964, just before she returned to RISD for her junior year, Amy Lou reached out to me. She not only reached out, she demanded to see me. And yet when I found my way to her grandmother's house where she was staying, she looked terrible and she was unfriendly and she didn't seem interested in anything I had to say. I'd never seen her like that in my life, not once. After half an hour of walking around, I said I needed to leave because of traffic. I was angry and frustrated. It only occurred to me after she disappeared in February that perhaps she had demanded to see me in September because she wasn't well. But there's something else. 2 weeks before she disappeared at Jones Beach, she sent me a mysterious charcoal drawing, which turned out to be a drawing of my Volkswagen underwater at a beach, obviously Jones Beach, because Amy and I had gone to Jones Beach together since we were children. A few days after I received that drawing, I heard from my mother that Amy Lou had been asked to take a medical leave of absence from RISD. And furthermore, that the day before she had gone with her mother to sketch at Jones Beach, she disappeared. In those first few days after her disappearance, her mother had wondered if Amy Lou had hitched into the city to find me, her oldest friend. So yes, I was part of the failure. And more than 50 years later, I've written this book, because it's upside down, but Searching for Amy Lou Danzer. Here's just a couple of pages from the book. In the early spring of 1985, I was working in my darkroom on a photograph I'd taken a few weeks earlier in Central Park. On that February day, a gray day, I'd wandered down Central Park West and turned into the park at 65th Street. As the afternoon light faded, I walked through a deserted children's playground not far from Columbus Circle. Suddenly it began to snow, a thick snow that fell like feathers. In a matter of moments, everything in the park had turned lacy and mysterious. Shielding my camera under my coat, I checked the exposure, knowing the snow would hold the light for a few extra minutes. Then I slipped into the zone of silence where photographs are found. Breathing deeply, I saw 3 bare patches of black cement under the seats of 3 snow-dusted swings. A winter lyric with half notes. Let me just show you that photograph so it makes some kind of sense to you. Now, weeks later, in the darkroom, Dylan's Idiot Wind playing in the background, I looked at the photograph under the enlarger. The bare whitening park, the 3 snowless patches, and something wrong. The seat of the middle swing was askew, tilting, a useless swing. As the afternoon wore on, and I fell into the rhythm of familiar work, I remembered the rope swing that had hung from a large branch in Amy's backyard, a relic of childhood. Amy Lou, I thought, would now be in her early 40s, a pale blonde woman with blue eyes that narrowed when she laughed. I couldn't quite picture her, not an aged Amy Lou. My memories of her, of which there were fewer each year, were like a small exhibition of still photographs. Her face next to mine at Jones Beach, her cheek caked with sand, her flushed face beneath a silly beanie on McDougal Street, her breath condensing in the cold air. In dreams, I could recapture a lively Amy Lou, but it was a slightly skewed Amy Lou, upon whose laughter and admiration I could no longer count. Sometimes, though, in the dark room, when the ordinary world was silent and reveries floated above the sound of running water, she seemed close by and familiar. For instance, what would she think of this photograph? Well, the answer was obvious to me. She would take it in all at once, silently, approvingly. The snow, the solitude, the distilled air, the tilted seat. She'd know in her bones that a child sitting on a tilted seat will always slide into the pinch. She'd feel the pinch, and she would hear the absent children's voices, which was the secret of the photograph, beyond the silence of the falling snow. More than a quarter of a century has passed since I worked in my darkroom on that Central Park photograph, communing with Amy Lou as if her suicide were a brief interruption of our friendship, a wrinkle that could be brushed away. That's not so strange or unusual, is it? The unexpected suicide of a close friend is humiliating. It ruins the present and muddles the past. It refutes everything, the here and now, common memories, candor, shared music, remembered laughter. It's so large a fact that it can't be taken in all at once, not by half. So one resorts to magical thinking, to an alternative reality. My friend killed herself, but not really. Is this kind of wistfulness too irrational to be taken seriously? I don't think so. Rationality rarely takes into account the tremulous imaginings that underlie our emotional life, and which, even more than our actions, shape our unique personalities. Rationality doesn't measure the indwelling force of the dead who helped or hindered us, nor does our memory of them, which remains active and vivid and welcoming, even though they are gone, come to a standstill because they rejected us in the last fraction of their life. Memory doesn't work that way. Okay.
Thanks you, John. That is a really, really awesome passage that you read. And I was wondering, since what happened to Amy happened a long time ago, were you always writing this book or writing it in your head?
No, I didn't even think about writing the book until probably a quarter of a century had passed. And you're, by then I'm in middle age, and you're thinking about things and your past. And I realized that the only, I had friends who had committed suicide, or who had died young in any case. But she kept appearing in dreams, not very often, 2 or 3 times a year. She'd appear in dreams, and it was always like a real puzzle. I mean, it was like almost like I would always ask her in the dreams, what's going on? Why did you do that? I thought I was supposed to be your oldest friend, et cetera. And then I realized it just wasn't quiet. And I started thinking, well, as a writer, this is puzzling. Why this one person? Why is she so unquiet? So it started to take shape, just the idea. And since nobody knew why she had committed suicide, I thought that I would try to find out what was up with her in the last couple of years of her life, because we hadn't been in touch very much. And so I posted a letter in the RISD alumni magazine. Anybody remember? Please share reminiscences. And I got back some letters, and suddenly the notion that Amy had killed herself because she was crazy, or because she was early onset schizophrenic, that started to disappear a little bit, that easy notion, because I realized that there are plenty of reasons why a young woman in 1965 at the Rhode Island School of Design could have become suicidal. And then started to think about just the nature of just tracking down all I could about her life. And then all of a sudden, the book began to shape itself.
Did you run into any like roadblocks or memory blocks when you were tracking some of this down?
Well, the fact is that over the years, I kept a journal, and in that journal, I wrote down the dreams that I'd had about Amy Lou. I didn't keep a dream journal, but it was, when I look back over it, I started keeping it around 1965. It's funny that I have such a record of dreams. And hers were the only ones that were really puzzling. The rest were surrealistic, nightmarish, how dreams are. But hers were very personal and strange, and she wouldn't answer questions. And so I don't know. Just over. No, I mean, I had those journals, and not to mention the fact that I was 21 when she committed suicide. She was 20. So at 21 and 22, I was thinking back at the time of the conversations that we'd had only, within the last year or two. So I had access to memory, had she committed suicide in her 40s, I would have had to have gone back to conversations that had occurred 20 or 25, and then I would have had to have, but at the time, and so, things stayed with me.
Did you find any surprises in your journals?
Well, the dreams, certainly the consistency of the dreams and the fact that I wasn't allowed to reach her in the dreams, that she would never confirm, that when I would say, I was your best friend.
Yeah, I've heard with dreams with loved ones, and I had a friend that committed suicide as well. Those dreams seem much clearer. They seem much different. They seem much real. And I was wondering if you had that same experience with your dreams about Amy.
I did. But I mean, what happened along the way was, I eventually went up to Rhode Island to the Fleet Library because I'd found out from that posting that I did in the Alumni magazine that she had written articles. And I started to read her articles. And when I read her articles, I realized that she was a much more complicated person than I had thought she was when I was a young man. And all of a sudden, it became clear to me that the problem that I was having wasn't so much that Amy was Amy, but that I had been that particular young man. So the book is literally about the frailty of a self-absorbed young man. And I didn't don't personally choose to accuse myself. Every young man is pretty much, I don't know about right now, but every young man was pretty much like that. They just didn't listen to what someone was saying. So all of a sudden I'm confronting a person. I mean, here I am in my 40s, maybe 50, reading articles by a girl I never knew. And I started to wonder, well, why didn't I know her? So, then all of a sudden you've got a book, it's about her and it's about you.
Was that clear from the beginning, or did the book kind of or did you allow the book to take its own direction?
The book took its own direction entirely. I mean, it wasn't even a book. I mean, I had been on NPR, I did a few, a lot of commentaries on all things considered in the 1990s. And there were a few about Amy Lou on like the 40th anniversary of her death and my first visit to her parents and all of that. And I just had these little 3-minute essays. But then I began to, sketch in scenes. I began to remember when we'd gone to the Museum of Modern Art and she'd seen Andrew Pollock or Jackson Pollock. And I just, could go to my journals. I could hear the voice of the guy who wrote the journals, who was so incredibly fatuous. And all of a sudden I had a character that happened to be me. And I had a young woman whom I didn't really know. Yeah. So it was like planting a garden. You start out with the few things that and then you start adding. You start finding where the shade works and where the highlights go. The book was written well over a 20-year period. So it was by no means like I sat down and wrote a book. It was organic.
So moving from being a commentator on NPR to being interviewed on NPR about your book, was that sort of a strange experience for you?
Well, I was never interviewed on NPR about the book. I mean, my commentaries were through in about the year 2000, and this book was published in 2008. and 21. It was published last June. So no, I was never, I was never interviewed about that, but that would have been interesting.
Yeah, well, I'm sure if you pitch them, it's probably you can get on really easy. So you were a teacher after you graduated with your degree. You taught at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, but you quit to write essays and be a photographer. Was that a difficult jump for you in your life?
No, I didn't quit because of that. I quit because I quit teaching after 6 years because I got into political trouble. I led the strike that closed down the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill when the Kent State kids were murdered. And it was the largest strike in UNC's history. And when the strike was over, the university tried to bring a lawsuit against me. I was the only faculty member and I was just an instructor, a teaching fellow. But I realized I taught for one more year. They put a censor in my classroom to make sure they didn't talk about the war. And I just thought, the hell with this. I'm not going to teach anymore. I'm just not made for the university. And so I left and went to Crete with my first wife and came back a year later and had to figure out something to do. So I became a photographer, writing here and there essays. So it's been a pretty eclectic, ambulatory life.
Well, you're very well known and photographer, and I'm just wondering that after you completed your book, do you still consider photography your sweet spot?
Well, I'm going to be 80 soon, and the kind of photographs that I took, they were out there on the street, New York, New Orleans, Lower Ninth Ward. At this point, I feel a little more comfortable writing, and especially after the book was published. And also, the world of photography has kind of moved away from the kind of work that I did. It's more conceptual, Photoshoppy, and I'm certainly not going to get into a world compete with young people in a photography world that's driven by technology. So no, it's not over with for me. I still want to take photographs, but not with the same passion. Writing is what I like to do right now.
So are you working on something new?
I am. It's not a book. It's just going back to when I was a kid and trying to figure out what was going on in my parents' life. Whoever thinks about that when you're 12, but then, 50 years later, you think, well, wait a second, some decisions were made, things were happening. And then you start going into who your mother was, who your father was. And, you have a subject. I don't know if it's going to be any good, but you know how it is. I mean, where your subjects come from.
Yeah, back to your current book, you got a phone call when Amy disappeared. You got the phone call from, was it her mother or her grandmother at the time? And initially, why did you think you were getting the call? Did you have any flash that something was going on?
No, I got the call because at the beach when Amy disappeared, she got into an argument with her mother at the beach. And this was 3 days after she had been asked to leave the Rhode Island School of Design because her behavior was bizarre. So she was home and her mother had said to her, you need to see a psychiatrist. And she got angry and stormed up the beach and she said, I'm not crazy. The world is, yelling. And she disappeared. Now, her mother, the cops came, the helicopters, They could find no trace of her. And so her mother assumed that she had hitchhiked into the city, upset, about everything, to see me. So I was called basically to say, if Amy shows up, let us know. But that wasn't the case, of course.
All right, DeWitt Henry has a question here. He says, I remember Wright Morris's The Home Place being hailed as an early attempt to combine photographs with prose story. Have you ever tried anything like that?
Well, this book has photographs in it, but they're not the kind of photographs that I take as an art photographer. They're photographs from the past. But no, I haven't, and I haven't really considered it, because I think it's really difficult to make prose and photographs work together. However, on Facebook over the last couple of years, I've posted little essays with my photographs, with certain photographs. And I think that's very interesting, but I'm not sure how it would work. Being, online stuff is sort of different, you know what I mean? I mean, people, they get real excited about something for 40 seconds online. I'm not
Now,
sure that a publisher would say this would work as a book.
Now, which would come first on your Facebook post? The photograph that you would write something based on the photograph, or something you wrote and accompanied with a photograph?
I'd look at a photograph that I was going to post and begin to write about it, and then post them both together. The photograph might have been taken 50 years ago, but all of a sudden, I, a paragraph, just and hopefully a kind of elliptical, not just simply a descriptive paragraph about the photograph itself, but something suggestive, so that they would combine together. It just seemed to me like a really transient little thing that could happen on Facebook. And really transient, of course, because once it's gone, it's gone. But I like that. I like that combination, but I don't know that I could ever do anything with it.
Now, what about the shift from film photography to digital? Personally, how did it affect your work?
Well, I mean, I fought against it for a long time, but I would, in about 2004, standing at a darkroom sink after more than 30 years, my ankle, it was no good. It was difficult to stand. And right around that time, a friend of mine said, here, send me one of your negatives and tell me which one. And he said, just look at what I can do with this on, Photoshop. So it was a mixture of things, it was the timing was right. And I just decided to scan my negatives and no longer print in the darkroom. But I don't have any kind of real respect for photoshopped photographs. I mean, I think the real thing is darkroom photographs. They're beautiful. But very few people are doing that anymore. And most everybody is now exhibiting digitally enhanced photographs. And, I just don't even know how to relate to that. I scan my negatives that I used to take. I scanned all my negatives, and so I can put them online. But my heart is with silver gelatin darkroom prints, and it always will be.
Okay, let's wrap up with this question. If Amy Lou was, what was going on in her life was happening today with her, is society with the healthcare as it is better equipped to help her?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, gosh. Yeah. I mean, in 1965, her parents were probably just like almost all parents. If you went to a psychiatrist, you were some kind of Park Avenue rich person, or there was something shameful about being that kind of unhappy, that kind of despair, whatever it was. And not to mention that the quality of care in 1965 for people who were mentally, and I don't conclude the book that she was mentally ill. I mean, I honestly believe that had she received help of some sort, whatever condition she was in was a momentary thing. It might have been but she could have received help, maybe. I mean, who knows? There was no diagnosis. See, that's the only reason I could have written the book, is there was no diagnosis. If there'd been a diagnosis, said, yeah, she's definitely, and there was no such thing as bipolar at the time. She's definitely a schizophrenic. Then I would have had no book. I'm not going to argue with doctors, but there was nothing. So, yeah, at the time, it was just close to the end of that period in which there was not proper treatment. But within a few years, and particularly after Ken Kesey's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, things changed a great deal in terms of the care of people who could have been institutionalized.
All right. Well, John, thank you so much for sharing your book and your life with us tonight. And for folks that would like to take a quick peek, John, what is your favorite local indie bookstore that people maybe can order online to purchase, searching for Amy Lou Danzer?
Well, the best, I mean, Flyleaf, it's called Flyleaf, but Waywiser Press, which is in England, and I don't think it's any more expensive to get it there. I mean, that's of course where the writer makes. Everybody makes a little more money if you don't have to go through the middle of it. Definitely not Amazon. But Flyleaf Bookstore, one word, Flyleaf, that is my local independent bookstore. And they were kind enough, when the book came out, to give me a big reading there. And in fact, it was like in June, so it was it was their first in-person event in a very long time. So I've always been grateful. That was a really sweet thing to do.
All right. Well, thanks once again. If for the folks that are watching the stream on the Facebook page, the link is up if you'd like to come in and join us for the open mic. Don't feel shy about popping in. And thanks for watching. And hopefully we'll see you guys streaming next week.